Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. I'm thanking all of you attending for the second book forum. And today's book forum, we would like to discuss newly published edited volume. The editor is here. One of them is Professor Komarudin Hidayat, our rector. This book is published by Uiii Press, Triple IU Press, Triple IU Press, in collaboration with Mizan. And this book is actually to cover the three most important thinkers, scholars, and also activists of the Indonesian Muslim. Usually we categorize them as the progressive Muslim thinkers and activists. They are Nurcholish Madjid, the late Nurcholish Madjid. For those who are not familiar with Indonesian studies, Nurcholish Madjid was of the leading Muslim scholar promoting the issue of Islamic modernism and reformism in Indonesia. He was also a first person who promote the importance of adopting secularization, not secularism, but secularization in the context of Indonesia. And the second important scholar that became the focus of this book was the late Abdurrahman Wahid. Abdurrahman Wahid was the leading figure of the largest Muslim organization in Indonesia, Nahdlatul Ulama. He was also former president of Indonesia 1999 until 2001. And the importance of Abdurrahman Wahid in the context of Indonesian Islam is his thought on what we call neo-traditionalist Islam, who combine between the classical source of Islam and also the modern idea of modernity. And many people who knows about Indonesian studies, I think, refer a lot when they are talking on progressive Muslim movement in Indonesia to these two Muslim thinkers. Last but not least, this book also cover Ahmad Shafi'i Ma'arif, Professor Ahmad Shafi'i Ma'arif, who was the former leader, the second largest Muslim organization, Muhammadiyah, we call Muhammadiyah, and he was graduated from Chicago University, was student of very famous Muslim reformist called Fazlur Rahman from Pakistan, I think, Fazlur Rahman from Pakistan. And Professor Komarudin Hidayat compile articles, chapters that focus on these three Muslim figures in Indonesia. And today we are very lucky because we have at least three contributors of this article. One is Pak Shafi'i Anwar, the second is Pak Philip Vermonte, and the last one is I myself. I also contribute chapter here in this book. And we would like also to invite comments from Ibu Nina Nurmila. And I think maybe Pak Rector can give some kind of introduction. You will be speaking later. And for the first opportunity, I would like to give to Pak Shafi Anwar. Pak Shafi Anwar is very interesting figure because he is supposed to be the member of Muhammadiyah. So if we talk about Indonesia, we have two leading Muslim organizations, Nahdlatul Ulama. I follow Nahdlatul Ulama. Pak Shafi is the member of Muhammadiyah. But Pak Shafi in the eyes of Abdurrahman Wahid, Gus Dur, he has very privileged position. Gus Dur was asking him to edit his important piece and articles, and it was published in 2008-9. Yeah, the title is Islamku, My Islam, Islam Kita, Islam Your Islam, and Islam Our Islam. This is very important book of Abdurrahman Wahid at the time, and I think in this book Pak Shafi'i wrote about Abdurrahman Wahid, right? I'll give you about 10 until 15 minutes to talk about that kind of issue. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon to all of you, my dear student friends. Thank you, Pak Shafiq, for giving introduction related to this discussion. First of all, I would like to convey my gratitude to Mas Komar, to our rector, who initiated this book, which is very, very important, because this book, in my perspective, something like a mapping the thoughts of very noted Islamic intellectual, Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif. Of course, this is very, very important because this book shows to us that those three intellectuals, very, very, not only very, very good, very good perspective related to Islam itself, but also in terms of building something which is related to the inclusive approach related to Islam. That's why in this book, the title of my contribution to this book is that the three warriors of inclusive Islam and pluralism in Indonesia. It's mean that to be translated freely in Indonesian language, tiga pendekar Islam inklusif dan pluralisme Indonesia. That's my the title of my contribution. In this regard, of course, I would like to share with you all related to my engagement and then my relationship with the three, because this is my personal experience. In terms of Cak Nur, it's very, very, very memorable for me because he's not only my senior, my mentor, but also he was also my supervisor when I was doing my master degree in University of Indonesia, Faculty of Social Science. It was Cak Nur who guided me related to the idea of Islam in Indonesia in general, especially related to political Islam. Cak Nur directly supervised my thesis, and then thanks God that finally I obtained a good comment from all the examiner. But in daily activities, I used to meet with Cak Nur, not only in terms of any issue related to his thought, but also related to political Islam in Indonesia. That's Cak Nur, and the product of my relationship with Cak Nur and then my thesis is that to be published by Paramadina with the title Pemikiran dan Aksi Islam Indonesia, the thought and then action of Indonesian Muslim, published by Paramadina in 1995. That's about Cak Nur. But in general, we have very, very good relationship, personally and then intellectually. The second one is that Gus Dur, as Shafiq told you all, that Gus Dur decided to give me opportunity to edit his book collection of article actually. The title is that Islamku, Islam Anda, Islam kita. My Islam, your Islam, and our Islam to be published I forgot the year is that, but if I'm not mistaken, 2018 movie. I forgot. Yeah, actually published by Wahid Institute. The interesting, interesting event which I deal with Gus Dur is that when he trusted me in order to edit and then to collect and giving forward for his book, he told me that I decided to give you opportunity to you to edit my book because I know you are not only Muhammadiyah but you are also Nahdlatul Ulama. I thought at the time I was thinking that Gus Dur is joking. No, because you are Muhammadiyah but no better about Nahdlatul Ulama compared to any other Muhammadiyah activist the others. So at the result is that I call myself that and even when I was active in any social activities, especially with Shafiq, with Shafiq, we together established ICIP, International Center for Islam Pluralism. So my Muhammadiyah declining. Then on Nahdlatul Ulama rising because I'm committed to developing pesantren under, of course, with Shafiq and then along with any other member of ICIP. So when I visited pesantren, because I was trusted by Gus Dur to edit this book, so it is very very interesting. Why? Because whenever I visited pesantren, many kiai kiss my hand, which is unusual for Muhammadiyah because I am Muhammadiyah never ever committed to that kind of tradition. But it is good because this is respect to me. So my Muhammadiyah friends complain me, Pak Syafi'i now is becoming Munu Muhammadiyah NU. Munu. So they criticize me because of it. And then of course with Shafiq, I learned from Shafiq a lot about pesantren because I never studied in pesantren. So Shafiq is very very expert in pesantren. So we together established ICIP. And that's my relationship with Gus Dur. And last but not least is that Buya Syafi'i Marif. I call him Bang Syafi'i. We have the same name, although my name is Syafi'i, but I am his junior in Muhammadiyah. But my relationship with Buya Syafi'i is also unique because it was Buya Syafi'i Marif who guided me related to a perspective about especially in terms of conceptual framework related to the relationship between religion and state. And then what I learned from him is that he is committed to the idea about this deformalization of Sharia. Deformalization of Sharia. Okay, this is my brief experience with those three noted Muslim intellectuals. The second point is that that I would like to share with you all is that in my book, in my article, I divided the three perspective, the two perspectives related to political Islam. The first is that what I call as a legal, exclusive, Sharia oriented, minded for Muslim community, which is mostly committed to the idea of formalization of Sharia. In this regard, I would like to strengthen here that those three intellectuals, Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Syafi'i Marif, if you study it a lot about their opinion, it's quite clear that the three of them is very committed to the idea of deformalization of strict, legal, and exclusive Sharia. This is Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Buya Syafi'i Marif. Buya Syafi'i Marif especially criticize the idea of Piagam Jakarta, whatever. Yeah, but and it is interesting that people such as Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, his role intellectual model his role of intellectual model is not say Pak Natsir, not Muhammad Rum or any other Mashui. Despite the fact that Shafi'i Ma'arif was born in a Masyumi family, Shafi'i Ma'arif is committed or having a role model as Bung Hatta, our founding fathers, yeah, and that's the idea of Shafi'i Ma'arif is very important because until at the end of his life is that he's very committed to the idea of deformalization of Sharia. He totally disagree with the idea of Islamic State, yeah, because according to Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, learning from Pakistan, learning from any other countries, those who are committed to Sharia, especially strict, legal, and exclusive Sharia Amindah, fail. This is the warning of Shafi'i Ma'arif in order not to follow the idea related to Sharia minded, especially strict, legal, and exclusive Sharia. Yeah, this is Shafi'i Ma'arif. And then the two is that, the two second perspective, what I call as a substantive and inclusive Islamic perspective. It means that in this regard, rejecting the idea of Islamic State, and then, of course, promoting the so-called inclusive Islam, tolerant Islam, moderate Islam. That's the three of our role model or Muslim, noted Muslim intellectual, Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Shafi'i Ma'arif committed to inclusive, and then say substantive, in which very committed to tolerant pluralism, etc. If we something like flashback related to the idea of say Islamic state in any other legal perspective of legal exclusive Islam, it was quite clear that those three intellectual committed to inclusive Islam. That's why they committed to pluralism, especially Cak Nur. There is a transition process, transformation process that from the idea of the renewal of Islamic in 1970s, when Cak Nur declared pembaruan pemikiran Islam, the Islamic renewal of Islamic thought, and then when after finishing his study at Chicago University, Cak Nur is committed to the idea of pluralism. So this is the uniqueness, and then of course make significant contribution to the third part of my presentation is that giving significant contribution, especially just to give you example, Cak Nur, for instance, you still remember the idea of Cak Nur in 1970s, Islam yes, Partai Islam no. Islam yes, Partai Islam no, which is gives significant impact to the idea that Islam in Indonesia should be more inclusive, meaning then accepting any idea and joining party, but not necessarily to be member of Islamic parties, but all parties, as long as committed to, according to Cak Nur, is that idea of Maqasid Sharia, the idea of the principle of Sharia, which is inclusive Islam, not necessarily to be member of Islamic party. Interestingly, Cak Nur is that despite the fact that he totally disagree with Islamic State in 1977, Cak Nur campaign for PPP, Partai Persatuan Pembangunan, United Partai Indonesia, and then declare that it is important to support the marginalized marginalization policy done by the new order regime, and then of course in this regard Cak Nur to a certain level to be blamed this inconsistent. But I would suggest this is a good perspective which give significant impact to the idea that not necessary to become member of Islamic political parties, but all institutions. That's why, in this regard, many Muslim activists and many young generation also becoming member of Golkar, PDI, etc. This is something like opening the Pandora box of, say, close-minded. Yeah? That my concern. And then for Gus Dur, everyone know about this, about Gus Dur is is very committed to pluralism. But the difference between Gus Dur and Cak Nur, in my opinion, my subjective opinion is that Gus Dur is more, say, what I call, although his thinking, his article is good, but in terms of pluralism, more practical. So he dared to argue, and then he he campaign for say protecting minority Muslim, and then engage with, say, many non-Muslim activities. It is a bit different with Cak Nur. Cak Nur more related to political thinking and religious and political thinking, but Gus Dur practical in this regard. Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, I don't know, in the middle most probably. But in fact, is that Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, as far as I know, he was also member of Jamiatul Muslimin from PDI. So this is broad-minded perspective of the three intellectual. That's my concern about the three of them, and then of course we can discuss later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Shafi'i, because those who are attending in this discussion are also some students coming from foreign countries. I think we need some kind of little bit explanation to them. If we are talking about Indonesian Islam, usually in the context of Indonesia, we have two major and big organization here, which is firstly called Nahdlatul Ulama. This is I call as the largest Muslim organization in Indonesia, with a lot of numbers. Some people say around 70 million people, but some people say around 50. And the second largest is Muhammadiyah. This is reformist and modernist Muslim organization in Indonesia. And usually, Indonesian people affiliate with this organization. Because in neighboring country like Malaysia, they don't have civil Islamic organization like what happened in the context of in the context of Indonesia. And Pak Shafi'i said about the three most important figures within the Muslim scholars of Indonesia. And Pak Philip, around 15 minutes also.
Thank you, Pak Safik. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, first of all, for Safik and friends for inviting me to share my contribution in this newly published book. When the two editors contacted me to contribute in the plan for the book, Mas Gaus was the first who contacted me, and then asking me to contribute chapters of what I am thinking about the three leaders. Initially, I was reluctant, Pak Rektor, because I do not have background in the Islamic studies. I follow the three great leaders, intellectual leaders from afar. So I said to Pak Gaus, okay, let me think a little bit before I said yes, because that's going to be a huge responsibility to write about these three great leaders. But then the day after, Pak Rektor messaged me, asking me to contribute. Of course, Pak Rektor is my boss. I could not say no. So I said, yes, Pak Rektor. And then I was thinking what I should write. Now, then I decided to write a piece that I think at that time would be different from other writings in the book, because the three leaders and their impacts and contribution have been felt in terms of thinking, philosophical thinking, their interpretation about Islam, and how we in Indonesia should implement and practice Islam in the context of a nation that is plural and then there is developing countries. So the three of them share these traits of thought leaders. They are great thinkers, Muslim intellectual leaders. But then I was thinking, given my background, I am political scientist by training, what can I write about these three figures, but looking at them through the perspective and lenses of political science? Because I would not be able to compete with Pak Safi Ma'arif, who I believe has been very, Pak Safi Anwar, who I believe would write very eloquently about Cak Nur, Nurholis Majid, and Gus Dur, Abdurrahman Wahid, and Shafi Ma'arif. So then I was asking Pak Gaus, can I write about just one of them? And he said, maybe, because I already said yes, and Pak Rector already tasked me to write, and he said yes. Because my argument was, among these three leaders, they are all civil society activists. They are all cultural leaders of Indonesia. They are all thought leaders, as I said earlier, but only one of them has been in position of policymakers. And even in the top of the pyramid of power in Indonesia, being a president. And Gus Dur, as this policymaker and political leaders with the power to issue policies, I think has been understudied. Because being a thought leader, civil society leaders, of course, we all experience, we are not faced by the complexities of policies that you need to be really very, very inclusive as a policymakers. And maybe you're not dealing with the parliament, you're not dealing with political parties, and so you're not dealing with the nature of power relations if you are civil society leaders or thought leaders. But as a president, then I think we can see the true quality of the leader if they are in the position of making policies. And I think Gus Dur provides a very good example of how civil society leaders then transform into a formal political leaders. So then I decided to write about Gus Dur on that particular aspect that I think has been understudied. And hopefully after this, we're gonna scrutinize how there are some articles about this, but I think if we provide another context of this Gus Dur and others in the context of transition to democracy after Suharto fall in 1998, then that period of 1998 to 2001, so about 3 years, was very critical period for Indonesian democracy up until today. And this 3 years period has, in my opinion, also has been understudied. And there are a lot of things that emerged during that period. Number one, and as it is reflected in many articles in this book, I think they reflect two things about Indonesia. Number one, since day one of the Republic, August 17, 1945, our main issue, main problem, main social political problem that has continued until today with different dynamics is the relationship between state and religion. At the constitutional level, it's been settled that our constitution said Indonesia is a country that is not based on one religion, right? And we accepted, our founding fathers and mothers accepted this, the society accepted this, but it's kind of oscillating every period depending on the economic situation, geopolitics, global situation, domestic politics, and so on. There has always been problem with the issue of state and religion relationship. And Gus Dur is at the heart of this debate, I think, for the whole of his life. Since 1970s, as and Abdurrahman Wahid, Nurholis Majid as well, there have been on the side that favor Indonesia as a plural society, but at the same time, they were operating under the authoritarian government of the New Order since 1970s up until 1998. So, I think what Gus Dur did as a president is a reflection and continuation of what he had been before as the leader. And what was his relationship that affected the way he looked at policies and Indonesia's transition to democracy in his short period as a president in 1999 after the Indonesian election, right? Number one, Gus Dur faced a very delicate situation in every literature on transition to democracy. That short period of time is called an interim period. And also, I think it provides a lot of literature. We tend to study democratization as a long process, but there are critical moments of democratization everywhere. The very first year is considered very important. And Gus Dur was at the heart of this very critical moment. And I think we were lucky to have Gus Dur in that very critical period. But he had to face power struggles between those who support the outgoing authoritarian regime and the upcoming democratic regime or society, if you will, right? And as a result, because Gus Dur became the president, not through direct presidential election like what we had today, he was depending on the coalition of Islamic parties. And this is also very interesting, given Gus Dur tend to be try to distance himself from Islamic political parties. But during that critical moment, he was aligning and he was supported by the Islamic parties to become the president. Not through, because we at that time did not have direct presidential election. So he relied on the support of this coalition within the parliament to become the president. So he owed some legitimacy from this Islamic parties coalition. So during his presidency, he had to play this very, very carefully because his narrative about him being a pluralist leader, but at the same time, he was supported by the Islamic parties. Number two, he faced very serious problem inherited as naturally from transition to democracy period. That was the threat of disintegration. Right. At that time, we just had a referendum in 1999 in East Timor, and the previous interim president before Gus Dur was President Habibie, right? And Habibie's accountability speech in the Indonesian parliament was rejected, partly because the Indonesian parliament thought Habibie made wrong decision about East Timor. And at that time, there was a real fear of Indonesia disintegrating. So Habibie's accountability speech was rejected, and Gus Dur inherited this fear of Indonesia's disintegration. We had problem in Aceh, and then in 98, 99, we had serious conflict, bloody conflict in Maluku, where Muslim and Christians, they killed each other, and so on. There was traumatic period in Indonesia as well. And then there were many aspirations. Some other provinces, there were talks about Riau, who wanted to separate from Indonesia and so on and so on. So this second problem faced by Gus Dur, the threat of disintegration. Number three, the problem that he faced, even more difficult, that is how to bring back the economic stability in Indonesia. For those of you who are coming from overseas, maybe if I may provide you some context of Indonesia's democratization, it started off with financial crisis in 1997. So the New Order government, the authoritarian government, based their legitimacy of successfully develop Indonesia economically and suddenly we had economic crisis in 1997. This legitimacy collapsed and evaporated. That's why the basis of new order kind of collapsed, because people felt, well, you don't have that kind of legitimacy anymore. We probably accepted authoritarianism, trading with economic prosperity. Now we are still authoritarian and we become poor because of the economic crisis. So it evaporated, but Gus Dur inherited this economic problem, how to revive the Indonesian economy. And that's not an easy job to do. Number 4, the problem that he was facing exactly on the reforming Indonesian military. That was the backbone of the authoritarian government of the new order. So how he did this, and this is the point of my article, is that he's not looking at the domestic support and domestic legitimacy. Instead, he went overseas. Right? At that time, he was critiqued because why would a president during a very difficult period instead went overseas, visiting so many countries in a very short period of time? Gus Dur went to all ASEAN capitals. He visited Washington, D.C. to meet with Michael Kamdesu, the chairman of IMF. Indonesians would remember the big picture of Michael Kamdesu observing Suharto signing the memorandum with IMF. That IMF was supporting Indonesia with certain requirements that would also even attack the basis of Suharto's legitimacy. The image, if you Google it up, you would see how that image, and then that partly, I think, responsible for the way people see Suharto as now becoming weaker and weaker in front of the international audience, that is IMF. So Gus Dur met Michael Kamdesu in Washington, D.C. and so on, because he was, and then he met also with Bill Clinton. The image of Gus Dur laughing with Clinton very hard. Clinton was, I think, enjoyed his conversation with Gus Dur and other visits that he made. Even he, at that time, creating controversy in Indonesia because he was saying he's going to fire Pak Wiranto, right? At that time, the Minister of Defense from overseas. That was, he was, if Pak Shafi'i earlier said that Gus Dur, Nurholis Majid, and Shafi'i Ma'arif are deformalizing Islamic interpretation in Indonesia, Gus Dur was deformalizing power in Indonesia, right? And that, I think, is one of the greatest contribution, because now people see power not from the perspective of something untouchable and unreachable. And Gus Dur, with his NU background and so on, very relaxed and so on, make power looks very accessible, that people could really access the president and could pay critiques, because Gus Dur has been smartly and playfully play his card. Suharto government, for the whole of the New Order government, they are afraid of Nadatul Ulama, I think, because this is the group that could challenge the power of the New Order government, right? And Gus Dur knows it. But at the same time, the New Order government needs Nadatul Ulama, because the narrative of the New Order government is maintaining Indonesia's pluralism through, sadly, through authoritarian means. So Gus Dur sees this, his unique position, that he is the opposition to the New Order government, but at the same time, he is also needed by the New Order government and the Indonesian Armed Forces. And this Gus Dur played his card very, very smartly, I think, especially in the last 5 years before Suharto fell down. So with this modality, Gus Dur has been, through his diplomacy tactics, I would say, because in the short period of time, essentially for those of you who are studying foreign policy and so on, we cannot really say that Gus Dur has had foreign policy, because foreign policy includes strategy, long-term strategy, and so on. But because the nature of his presidency is the interim government with specific condition that he would need to be very tactically deals with domestic and international challenges. But Gus Dur, in my opinion, as I said in this article, if you could read it later, I think the contribution is that he's showing that even then, Indonesia cannot escape from the international factors, and at the same time, our local, our domestic situation can also be used to extend Indonesia's interest. Because when Gus Dur he attended the OIC summit at that time, and he was arranging that the OIC leaders would make a statement that they all would support Indonesia's national integrity. Because at that time, there was a concern that the GAM, the Free Aceh movement, would use the Islamic countries to support, because that was critical moment. They had their time to really separate from Indonesia. But Gus Dur managed to get that kind of a statement. And also in terms of Papua, Gus Dur launched the idea of the West Pacific Organization. Now people think that was not, applicable ideas. But back then, Gus Dur get support in terms of Papua. So, but that was tactical. It's not really foreign policy. Lastly, if I may say, one thing that I did not put in the article is that how his presidency ends. Right? As we know, he was being brought down by the same Islamic party who elevated him to the Islamic party. Now, in the context of democratization, I think Samuel Huntington, the political scientist, once theorized that a democratic transition is consolidated if they manage to have two elections, full cycle of two elections. But at the time, Gus Dur, our democracy was interrupted because there was this kind of internal coup, if I may use the word, right? So it was interrupted as a result, and that's not good. That's why I think our country presidential system, we rejected the idea of bringing down. It has to be fixed term, 5 years. You like it or not, wait until the next election to gain power, right? But that was interrupted in the Indonesian context, and that I think contribute as well to the difficult path that we are now walking since 2004, because the wound of that interruption, I think, has yet to be healed. Right? In terms of Nahdlatul Ulama, there were internal kind of a wound between Gus Dur family and others. It continues until today. And then there's distrust against the Islamic parties, and there are misunderstanding. Now every president would want to have big coalition, making sure that he or she will not be challenged. They are so afraid that they will be digusdurkan, right? So they want all presidents since 2004. They want to absorb power as much as possible, because that experience of Gus Dur created bad memory for any president who was elected afterwards. So this, I think, the contribution of Gus Dur, like any other president in Indonesia, and we are lucky, I'll stop here, that in the critical time of political division, Sukarno in 1965, he still could mobilize his supporter to fight against the movement, right? But he decided not to, because that would be bloody. In 1998, Suharto, I think the same. He would still be able to instruct the Indonesian military to crush the movement, the student movement and so on, because the military was still behind Suharto at the time. But he decided not to, right? He resigned from power. Gus Dur, the same thing. In the end, he said, okay, not being a president, it's fine. So he stepped down. But the wound at the society level continue. And this, I think, the the big lessons for Indonesian and for students coming from developing countries, Africa, Middle East, and so on, that coup is not good. Secondly, power has to be fixed and maintained, and we could only gain power through electoral means and democratic means. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Philip. This is very interesting elaboration, and placing one of our focus in this book, which is Abdurrahman Wahid, that or popularly called as Gus Dur, in running his power during the transitional period of Indonesian leadership at the time. And now we would like to get the comment from Ibu Nina about this book. Maybe as professor here and also as gender activist, what kind of issue that you want to highlight and maybe the weakness of this edited volume? Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for Pak Safik, who has invited me as one of the speakers, and I am the only woman and the only person who is not involved in writing this book. Yeah, so all the four are the contributors of this book. Actually, I remember there was time that Mbak Tami invited me to write about Ahmad Shafi'i Ma'arif, but maybe this is for different book. I don't know. Yeah, different book. Yeah, okay. So before that, actually, when Pak Shafiq invited me to be one of the speakers, I actually, was reluctant to accept this invitation because, I have so many deadlines. I'm afraid if I cannot finish reading, but I think this is a good opportunity for me to force myself to read, to keep me updated with the new knowledge. So I accepted this invitation, and he invited me for a purpose, to look at this book from gender perspective. Yeah. But before that, I would like to acknowledge the coming of our friends, other than my students and my fellow lecturers at IIIU. I can see that the urban Sufism administrator like Mas Elza Taher, Mbak Weka, and then Mbak Vivi are here. So welcome to IIIU. Thank you for your coming. And I'm not as close as Pak Shafi'i Anwar, to this three three Muslim thinkers discussed in this book. I know them. I know some of their thought, but I'm from like a distance, because I was at the time in Bandung, and it is close, but the nature of Bandung, I think, very different from Jakarta. Jakarta can be have liberal thinkers, but in Bandung, the thought tend to be more conservative, even though Bandung geographically very close to Jakarta. And I would like to also acknowledge the presence of Ibu Yati, the wife of Pak Shafi'i Anwar. Pak Shafi'i Anwar is my senior when I was student in Melbourne. I remember them, Pak Shafi'i Anwar and Ibu Yati, but I was just the seniors, junior. They might forgot about me, but I know them. But even though at the time I was also confused between Shafi'i Ma'arif and Shafi'i Anwar. There was time, because he looks also little bit similar, in terms of the face, So the face and the name is similar, And the second important point, I would like to give appreciation to our rector, Professor Dr. Komarudin Hidayat, who is the editor and the initiator to compile this book, which is very thick but very important. I think we need to Yes, to buy. Yes, please. And this is very cheap book in terms of like the quality, and then the heavy books. It's only 150, and you can buy it there. Okay, so this is the promotion. You forwarded that message, yeah. And the second editor, Pak Ahmad Gaus, he is also our one of the media staff, yeah. So it seems that Pak Shafiq, when gave the opportunity to me as a gender activist, he also pointed out actually what I would like to speak. He said that what is the weakness of the book from gender activists? Yes, yeah, there is something missing in this book. Yeah, in this very thick book, I think gender issues is like maybe it's about 2 to 3% being discussed. It's good that there is a writing from Sakinah Rosli who mentioned about that, and Lutfi Ashawkani also mentions about issues that is being overlooked, and I think this is also being. I don't read your chapter yet. Sorry. I think these three thinkers is different from Pak Shafiq, who is like, even though he is concerned with so many issues, like what being written in here, but he is intentionally has written book, yeah, special book discussing about women, such as hal-hal yang tak terlupakan ya tentang perempuan. So I'm proud of you, Pak Shafiq. I hope that you do not stop writing book about gender issues. Yeah, but even though these three Muslim thinkers didn't show their thinking about gender issues, and gender issues become neglected area for these three thinkers, they are not the opponent of the gender equality. In fact, as a woman, I'm very lucky having these three great thinkers because of their approach to Islam being substantialist, inclusive, pluralist. This thought provide good condition for women, yeah, and you know that there will be no democracy without gender equality. So even though gender issues become one of neglected areas for these three Muslim thinkers, as I said before, that they are not the opponent of gender equality. In fact, they are the supporters of gender equality. But because, for example, Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, I think it's too late for him to study about gender. There was time that she has gender bias expression as highlighted by Sakinah Rosli. One of the example of the gender bias expression mentioned by Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif is that he recommended that women it's better to be active after the age of 40, because before the age of 40, it is better for women to look after their children. I mean, being at home, the homemaker. So this kind of assessment is strengthening the stereotype, women's stereotype that women are mothers at home. When someone knows gender, actually, he will highlight the difference that, okay, it is biologically destined that women can be pregnant and then give birth, but it is the obligation of both parents to take care of the children, not only being emphasized for women only. But on the other side, I appreciate, for example, his interpretation of the Quranic verse 434, which is often being used to support gender inequality by putting that only men can be a leader. And Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif argues that this verse is only for domestic affairs. It is not meant to be for public affairs. This means that Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif support women leadership in public life. Yeah, so that's why I do not call them as well being disagreeing for gender gender equality. And the second, Cak Nur also didn't show any concern of the gender issues, but for example, his interpretation about head covering is liberating for women. As you know that Cak Nur believed that it is not not obligatory for women to wear the veil, and that's very important because one of the signs of the formalization of Islamic Sharia is the enforcement of women to cover their head. And we can see the case of, for example, of Iran during Reza Pahlavi, when wearing the veil is considered as pro-Western and liberation, and therefore it is prohibited for women to wear the veil. But this is changing, yeah, when after the revolution, Islamic Revolution in 1979, under Ayatollah Khomeini, women are being forced to veil. So the interpretation of Cak Nur about the veil can liberate and give more choices for Indonesian women, even though we know that after decentralization era, when there is intention from the Islamists to enforce Islamic Sharia, there are many local government who enforce to regulate women in order to veil themselves. Yeah. And about Gus Dur also didn't talk much about gender issues, but I am proud of his achievement of issuing the presidential instruction in 2000, number 9, about gender mainstreaming. And he has progressive minister at his presidency, that's Khofifah Indar Parawansa, who has changed the name of the Ministry of Women's Roles into the Ministry of Women Empowerment. So, and I, as a women activist, I really enjoy the Indonesian situation under the presidency of Gus Dur, when I think 1999 until 2001 become the peak period of the liberal substantive Islam. And then after that, I feel like a backlash in terms of the women's movement, etc. Because even though Megawati is a woman, I think she is not in support of the women empowerment, and she is become a president because of his father's influence. And yeah, well, I don't want to talk much about politics because I'm in front of Dr. Philip Vermonte, who is an expert. But I can see that even though Megawati is a woman, she is not in support of the gender equality. For example, in the case of polygamy, yeah, the three Muslim thinkers oppose polygamous marriage. But Megawati, I don't know, maybe because his father was polygamous, he saw his support to polygamy by ordering the food from restaurateur Puspa Wardoyo. Yeah, so this is a kind of support. And yeah, endorsement. And his vice president, Hamzah, has also practicing polygamous marriage during his vice presidency. And therefore, the practice of polygamous marriage under the presidency of Megawati Sukarno was mushrooming. And at that time was the time I was doing my PhD, and my dissertation topic is about polygamy, and it was easier for me to have the data on that, yeah, because of the situation, yeah. I think I will end my presentation by saying that even though these three Muslim thinkers doesn't so much concern on women issues, but we are women. Women are be able to enjoy very much under the situation of the acceptance of this thinking, because when the opposite thinking, like the formalization of Islamic Sharia, is enforced, women can suffer more because of the restriction and the enforcement of the legalistic conservative thinking. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Yeah. Thank you, Bu Nina. And now some word from the editor of the book.
Okay. Thank you, Shafiq. Well, the motive and objective of publishing this book is what and why. First, these three thinkers, they thought activities are in line with our vision and mission of this university. That is to promote inclusive and cosmopolitan Islam. That's why actually I was thinking that it should be written in English. But for the first time, I would like to address Indonesian society to know these three thinkers and to let them know that this university in line with this idea, and those three people just like locomotive that pulling the long wagon, each has long and large followers under the different categories of economic, politic, ideology, and social. That Gus Dur belong and affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama. To some extent, it is traditional society. And Saif Ma'arif to Muhammadiyah. And Cak Nur to the modernist society. It is in the urban society, his base. Those three type of large society, by those three thinkers, then they pull to the higher position. They were to some extent just like trapped within the ideological categories, and those three society, they put and make Islam and ideology just equal. So, I mean, Islam is became a prisoner of ideology. That's why Islam being reduced, that Islam should be under the category of ideology. Could be ideology of certain political parties. And the time Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Buya Shafi'i look to situation, it is a kind of make a reduction of Islam, distortion of Islam. That's why they educate the people that should step higher to the level of not only for the ummah conscience, not Islamic solidarity, but should step higher to the nationhood and brotherhood and humanity. Those three thinkers, that's why for my ayahs that Gus Dur, Cak Nur, and Buya Shafi'i, they make Islam being inclusive, having higher position, and more global, universal, even though they still appreciate the local root of this society. So, for the foreigner student, our friend, our student, who wants to know the contemporary Islamic thought in Indonesia, you should read and know these three type of thinker. Well, I hope that after this book will be published in English. By doing that, we can introduce further and larger society to know about Islam in Indonesia. And we write, the title is Inspiration for the World. Why? Because Islam in Indonesia is quite different from Islam in Middle East countries. First, for example, it is Indonesia, I think, that has long tradition of civil society. That the nation, the state, is it is the child of social movement in Indonesia. Also democracy. Democracy is the child of Indonesian society, of social movement. Even though it is enriched by many scholars who are study in Western society, but basically that the democracy has root in the social tradition in Indonesia. That's why that's giving answer to the researcher when they are coming to Indonesia. First they wonder, how come that Islam and democracy can go hand in hand together? After doing research in Indonesia, then they come up with the conclusion and answer why. Because Indonesia has long tradition in civil society. Those kind of society that I think even Egypt has no such civil society. And explain why the spring, Arab Spring is failed. Because they don't have the middle class basis, because they don't have strong civil society. That's why the democracy in Middle East countries are failed. It is quite different from Indonesia. Those three thinkers articulate and promoted this kind of ideas, how to strengthen the civil society. And Islam, according to the three thinkers, it's very compatible with idea of modernization, with the pluralism and globalism. I would say the DNA of Indonesian society is pluralism and religiosity. So anyone who want to know about Indonesia, they have to know this DNA of Indonesian society. That is religiosity and plurality. These three thinkers very accurate explaining this DNA of Indonesia. And it is very important for us. So far, what we have been doing, practicing Indonesia, very less articulated in scientific way. And this university, IIU, one of the objective in establishing this is how to articulate, how to formulate what is going on in Indonesia, that actually we are much further in understanding, practicing Islam compared to many other countries, but very less articulated in academic way. Through this campus, we do hope that we can introduce to the modern society, to the global society, to the Muslim world, what we have experiencing, hoping that that will be good experience for them. And again, thank you very much. And I think I will be happy to listen the discussion between audience and our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you to the editors who already explains the motive and reason behind publishing this edited volume. Now I'm opening the time for discussion, for question, respond, critical thought, and etc. And I would like to invite you if you have some ideas. Please raise the hand if you want. Maybe, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think this book is really significant and we have to buy. My question, I think one of our problem in our era is that some group tend to have a single definition of what Islamic is. So for example, the state, Islamic state is A, and other form of Islamic is wrong. And I believe our ulama, and also even Prof. Philip has mentioned, we had president who were also ulama. and I believe that our founding leaders, they have their own. This is our definition of Islamic. And my question, how you enlighten us that there are many kind of Islamic. That Islamic is not a single, not only one. Thank you very much.
Direct response, yeah. If we should collect the question.
Thank you. I forgot your name. Sonia, yeah. Yes, there are a lot of interpretation toward Islam itself from the, of course, this is very, very, very normal actually, because our interpretation, most probably our lecturer, our teacher, etc., and then ulama, even ulama, has different perspective about, especially related to political Islam. I'm not related to Islamic teaching, theological especially. Even in theology, there are a lot of interpretation, and that's natural, normal. It's been can be interpreted by many scholars, etc. But in this regard, is that you mentioned about the so-called Islamic State. Yeah, in my perspective, is that this is also if I use, for instance, Fauzi Nazar, or say those who are committed to the so-called Sharia oriented minded perspective, is that there is a concern that to formalization of Sharia itself. In this regard, the perspective of the legal exclusive perspective related to Islamic State, a state must be committed to, for instance, constitution must be based on Sharia, and then of course that any ideas related to Islam itself must be based on Sharia. So, according to Michael Hodgson, is that this kind of typical spreading in all of the world, especially in Muslim world. However, we are lucky because our founding fathers, at the end of the day, decided not to implement Sharia-based constitution, and this is related to the deletion of 7 words in Piagam Jakarta, the Jakarta Charter, with the word believe in one supreme God, with the obligation of Muslim adherents to implement Sharia. This 7 word was deleted, and this is the so-called gentleman agreements between nationalist leader and Muslim leader. So we are committed to establish Pancasila, our state principle, on the basis of the idea that belief in one supreme God is Tauhid. It's the principle of Tauhid. So not necessarily to state that Indonesia is to be based on Sharia. This is a great, contribution of our founding fathers, and the agreement between nationalist leader and Muslim leader was very, 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 very important, very crucial in our historical development. Because from that point of departure, we are able to maintain, to borrow Cak Nur's words, that Pancasila, our ideological foundation, is becoming common platform on the word of Cak Nur Khalis Majid's Kalimatun Sawa. So this is a great contribution of our founding fathers, and then to be supported by the 3 of our Muslim intellectual, Cak Nur, Gus Dur, and Buya Syafi'i Ma'arif. All of them, the 3 of them, supported the idea of, as I mentioned before, deformalization of Sharia. This is great contribution, as Pak Rector mentioned, that because of that, then we are, until now, we are happy that Pancasila still exists, alive, and becoming common platform of Indonesian society. And this is different compared to, for instance, in Pakistan, which is clearly mentioned that Sharia to be based, Sharia as the base of our state constitution in Indonesia. Despite the fact that Indonesia is majority Muslim populace, but the fact is that Indonesia is not an Islamic state. We are, Muslim. We are committed to Islamic teaching, to Islamic theological underpinning. But what we are committed is that not strict legal and exclusive Sharia, but democratic and inclusive Sharia. Thank you.
Okay, but before that, I would like to strengthening the question. What is the implication of having understanding that Islam is monolithic, Islam is one, and Islam is many in the context of politics?
Thank you, Pak Safik, for paraphrasing the question, because it's lucky that Pak Safi started, so I have some time to think as well. Number one, I think what we need to do is, or what we've been seeing in the context of Indonesia, I apologize for our foreign students because this is very in Indonesian context. What happened during the preparation of our independence, those meetings among our founding fathers and mothers, right? That peaked at that speech by Sukarno, the would-be president at the time, that actually this month we are celebrating the month of Pancasila, right? And I think there's a copy of that here in the library, the transcript of the his speech at the very last day of the preparatory committee for Indonesian independence, and that was Sukarno, and he summarized the debates, previous speakers during the debates, Christian leaders, minority leaders, Muslim leaders, and so on. So he took the last stage, and then I think the example that we could have from that very moment was that in terms of how we're going to deal with the plurality of thinking in the context of here, how Islam is being practiced, is that intellectualism is needed. At that time, I think Sukarno was powerfully arguing for the case of Indonesia being a plural society. And because the argument was so powerful, all the Muslim leaders agreed with him. On June 1st, there was the leaders of Muslim groups that upon hearing his speech, they were like, all right, this man is right, right? We could not argue more, right? Because he was not president yet, but he was so powerfully arguing for the case of Indonesia being a plural society with non-monolithic interpretation of any one religion. And if you are interested in looking at that speech, I think we do have copies of that speech in English, and I think in Arabic as well. There are some copies here. Secondly, I think also, as I said earlier, normally I think I have friends in Muhammadiyah who are members of PDIP. Pak Safi call himself MUNU, Muhammadiyah NU. Well, we have friends in Muhammadiyah who is a PDIP politician. They call themselves Marhayan Muhammadiyah, right? So I think this cross-cutting affiliations, secondly, is needed. So if we have cross-cutting identities, that would help us avoiding monolithic interpretation, not only about religion, but about many other things, about politics and so on. If we are thinking cross-group, and then that's what we call public sphere, right? If students of communication knows this Habermas and so on, public sphere as an arena where you can actually see what are the things and what you think, and then you will find balance, so on and so forth. So these cross-cutting identities actually has been the identity of many Indonesians. For example, you are Javanese, but you are a member of NU or Muhammadiyah. At the same time, you go to, for example, Catholic schools, and then you are living in a neighborhood who are that is probably predominantly non-Muslims, and so on and so forth. So if we maintain these cross-cutting identities, and then I think Pak Rektor was very right that the DNA of Indonesia is that we have robust civil society. That really helped, I think, that we have these multiple identities reflected in these civil society organizations. And even CSO, civil society organization, existed before Indonesia exists. NU was established long before 1945. Muhammadiyah was established long before 1945, right? So the country is built by civil society. So that, I think, would help if we keep in mind that, number one, intellectualism is needed. Number two, maintaining cross-cutting identities, as these three great thinkers have shown, and they are the examples of this. They are the protector of minorities, right? And they are very, they are self-confident because they have intellectualism, so they could argue with everyone, with people from different background, because the level that they are maintaining is this high level of intellectualism. If I may, lastly, Mas Safik, I'm not promoting my my writing, but I quoted a passage by Time magazine, who ran a cover story on Gus Dur on its edition on November 1st, 1999. New Day Dawns. That's the title of the article. And he's saying about Gus Dur is that, by all account, Gus Dur is agile in both Western thought. So you can argue about any political thinking coming from Western tradition, right? But at the same time, he's very Javanese. And he has support from Muslims because he led Nahdlatul Ulama, the largest mass-based Muslim organization. But at the same time, he loudly champions the rights of Indonesia's Christian and other minorities. So you can imagine he has this quality of so many things in one person. So if we can have copies of Gus Dur, Nurholis Majid, and others, so many persons, as Pak Rektor has already mentioned, the objective of the university is that to produce that kind of intellectualism and portray different way of how we interpret Islam in the context of civil society.
Nina?
Yeah, forgive me if I misunderstood your question, but Islam can only be monolithic in its text, like the Quran. We have the Quran, but in order to be implemented in our daily life, we need to understand, to interpret, and the way we interpret can affect our implementation of Islam. Like what is being discussed by the three thinkers, there has been like two great divide in terms of the interpretation of the Quran. First is the textualists, who argue for the formalization of the implementation of Sharia, and therefore they want to have an Islamic state with all the formalization of legal. Like, for example, this tendency can be seen after the decentralization era, with the mushrooming of the Sharia-based regulation, requiring, like, for example, the prayer together, the duha, the veiling, like that. And in the opposite side is the people who argue for the contextual approach, like what being promoted by these three great thinkers, substantive and contextual approach. Yeah, I think what Lutfi Ashokani has written is also good to see, and all of the thinkers and almost all the writers here in opposition for the formalistic Islam. And this remind me to what Muhammad Abduh tell us, that when he visited Europe, he saw Islam without Muslim. But in Egypt, there are many Muslims without Islam. This means that in Egypt there is only like superficial label of Islam, but like in terms of cleanliness, justice, welfare, none. But in the West, in Europe, Islamic values are being implemented very well substantively. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you.
Well, one thing I would emphasize here is that those three thinkers are not against Islamic political party, but the thing that they don't like is to put Islam identical with political party. So to defend political party is not equal with defending Islam. And another thing is that those three of thinkers introduced the ideologization of Islam. It was Islam under the monopoly of political party, but those three thinkers then put Islam from those prison of ideology, then became inclusive, large, and Islam was liberated from the prison of ideology. We took Islam, we learned Islam, we practice Islam in so many ways. The spirit of Islam, values, egalitarianism, gender, and so on and so on. As for ideology, it's focused on the power struggle. And Islam more than just power struggle. Therefore, after that time, when you come, you feel Indonesian society, Indonesian Islam is more relaxed, more open, more inclusive. And those thinkers are being Muslim with the secure feeling. Look at others not as threat. Because many Muslims look at others as an enemy, as a threat. But those three people, no, they don't look at others as a threat, an enemy. Because Islam is much smarter, higher quality than others, why should put Islam equal with those? No. That's why I would say that those three thinkers liberated Islam from the hegemony and monopoly, those narrow ideology that affiliated with certain political party in Indonesia at that time.
Pak Ridwan after the student, ya, Saimah first.
Thank you so much for such a interesting session. It was really interesting. However, I have the first question is actually to Professor Kamruddin Hidayat. Well, whatever you talked, I was listening to you. So, what I understand from whatever you have said is that we should not, or can we comprehend the essence of humanity exclusively through the prism of Islam, or does it extend beyond the boundaries of this religion? Because you said that we need to be, go above the Islam and think about the humanity. So do you mean that the humanity is not existed within the prism of Islam and we need to go ahead of that? Another question is Indonesian Islam considered more favorable due to its perceived Western influences and the prevalence of westernized practices? Because based on my observation, it's been 1.5 years I have been here. What I have seen is that Indonesian Islam is a blend of various influences, including local traditions and elements of westernization. Why not, for an example, our professor, she mentioned about the incident of Iran. What that lady did is it still not justifiable, but it is her freedom, her individual freedom, but it is not justifiable when we talk about Islam. But what the people did, killing her, is still not right, because that violated the humanitarian rule. So, for example, I have not heard about the modern Islam before coming to Indonesia, but still, based on my understanding of Islam, is that what she did was wrong, but still other people who killed or whoever did the wrong was still not right. So why only understanding the modern Islam? Why not understanding the actual Islam with its correct teachings with its references, with the authentic references of Quran and Ahadith, rather than bringing a new, let's say, new Islam, naming it a modernized Islam, or let's say modern Islam. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we directly respond, yeah, because this is very kind of very hard question to Pak Rector, and especially to also to you, about the case of Iranian. Why we are not thinking when we are looking at the case of yeah. Pak Rector would like to respond first.
Two things I want to answer. That according to this thinker, no one can monopolize the interpretation and truth claim about the teaching of Islam. No one. I mean that there is not only in one phase, one type of Islam, because Islam is one, but it is open to be interpreted by so many people according to the situation. That is why what they offer to us is the contextualization of Islam within and in Indonesia, Islam in the Indonesian context. And those three thinkers, they knowledge very deep about the classical Islam, about the tradition of Islam. They are very deep, their knowledge about tafsir, hadith, and so on and so on. But what they have been done by them is how to contextualize Islam within Indonesia to liberate, because the time Islam is under the, well, being monopolized by certain group of thinker, and Islam should be attached to the political party, and that mean reducing Islam, getting narrow. Then Islam became the prisoner of the ideology, and it is, well, it is reducing the well, Islam itself. That's what I understand about the thinker, and that's what I mean to contextualize Islam in the context of Indonesia. What is going on?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Saima. I'm sorry if I do not answer your question or misunderstood your question. But in terms of, for example, the issue of veiling, you said about why don't we just adopt the correct teaching? I myself respect women's decision to veil based on their understanding of the Quran, for example, in An-Nur and Al-Azab. But I also agree with Nurholis Majid interpretation, who believe that it is not obligatory for women to veil. So it is like one Islam, the Quranic, which contains in the Quranic verses, but there are more than one interpretations. For example, on the issue of veiling, that Nurholis Majid or Cak Nur argues that what is important is covering the bosom, and I agree that it is that dress is cultural things, because even before the coming of Islam in the Arab, women have already put their own veil, but they open their bosoms, and veiling, like covering the head, it can be due to the heat, also the face veiling, it can be due to like maybe the sand, the wind, etc. But then it is interpreted as part of religious understanding. And we can see, for example, in the West, we don't need to instruct women to cover the head. Even the men, during the winter, they usually put the beanie. The beanie is covering all the head. Yeah. So I agree with Nurholis Majid that clothes is and veiling is part of the culture, and what is important substantively is the appropriateness. Yeah, in Indonesian language it is kepantasan. Yeah, this is interpreted from the verse illa ma dhahara minha. What usually appears in Sundanese context is different from like Papuan context in the East area. So because of the controversial nature of the understanding of so many issues in the Quran, so we cannot claim that our only interpretation is correct. I think being not putting the veil on our head is not being like we modernized. No, there's a choices that the state cannot interfere by, for example, prohibiting women not to veil or instructing women to veil, like what happened in after the revolution, or prohibiting women not to veil, like in Iran before the revolution, and also in Turkey. I know the suffering of Muslim women in Turkey who believe that it is obligatory for them to veil, but then it is being prohibited. My friend was studying in Turkey. She is a woman, and it is hard for them, for example, to have choice. I mean, to choose between whether to access education without veiling or not, or to put veiling without access to education, because in Turkey there was time that it is prohibited for women with veil to enter the university. So I think let individual women decide whether to veil or not to veil without the state intervention. That's what I agree. Thank you.
You would like to have a comment?
Just a little bit. I don't think we are westernized. I have a Spanish name. Indonesia, as you know, is an archipelago. So we have so many sea lanes. And our archipelago has been here for thousands of years, right? So naturally, because it is the sea lanes, people have been coming and going from Indonesia and outside Indonesia. Same thing. So many versions of Islam came, right? Some coming from the Arab countries, some from India, and then some from China, so Persia and so on, because, you know, that's the nature of our archipelago. So what then we have is a very loose, if I may say, open mind, because we've been interacting with so many different interpretations and different cultures, and they met with our own culture, and then so naturally we are blessed, I think, with this openness, even our language and Bahasa Indonesia. So I think Indonesians is used to accommodate. These three thinkers, they accommodate, they protect the minority, and I think this is the DNA as well for Indonesia. One prime example is the choice of the national language, Bahasa Indonesia. The majority of Indonesians are Javanese, but our national language is not Javanese. Our national language is Bahasa Indonesia, rooted for, this is a language of minorities. Malay, a certain type of Malay language. It's been adopted by Indonesia, right? So since the very beginning, before even we become independent, the lingua franca, or the language of the traders, are this Malay language. So we are not, the Javanese are not imposing their language, right? They have 100 million population more in Indonesia, but we are not. And the same thing, I think the same is true for religion as well. That because that kind of a long historical tradition of Indonesia being an archipelago where people come and go, they are transiting, they are on their way to the Pacific, or they are on their way to the to Japan, to the mainland Asia, and so on. So they stay here, have intercultural encounters and so on. So what we have right now is a blend of these various historical traditions, not only religious, different religious tradition, but so many aspects form Indonesia's national identity and DNA, I think.
Just additional point, yeah, to respond to Saima, that indeed to certain level, I say, frankly speaking, is that to certain level, the idea of especially Cak Nur and Shafi'i Ma'arif is influenced by Western perspective. It's clear, yeah. especially because to certain level they not only studied in the Western University in the USA, Chicago, but also under the supervision of the late Fazlur Rahman. Because Fazlur Rahman, popularly known as the say, proponent of a neo-modernist Islam. This is clear, and then we could not reject this one. However, it is very important that when they return from their study to Indonesia, they also promote a classical and then say traditional perspective about Islam. In this regard, is that very very important that they very much concerned with situation in Indonesia that not only a plural society but also variety of ethnic culture, etc. And then this is very very important to consider that Indonesian Islam should be more inclusive and tolerant, and then committed to pluralism, which is basically rooted from the Western perspective. That the first. However, in this regard, it is crucial and then important that to mention about the approach proposed by the late Gus Dur, Abdurrahman Wahid, that he was promoting the idea of indigenization of Islam in Indonesia. So it's mean that it is Gus Dur who strongly opposed the implementation of the Arabization of Islam in Indonesia. Gus Dur is committed to Indonesian. It's mean that he also promote the traditional value, respect to local wisdom, etc. And that's why Indonesian Islam is totally different to certain level in terms of culture and in terms of to certain level civilization, etc. Which is basically rooted from the local wisdom, local inclusive Islam, which is spreading in our Indonesian archipelagos. And in this regard, we brought that we thanks to Gus Dur that because of indigenization Islam Indonesia maintain very well, and then maintain inclusivism, and then respect to religious others, and then still maintain traditional value, which is totally different with the Middle East, in which especially because the influence of Wahhabism in especially Arabian Peninsula in Indonesia to certain level, I would suggest that the role and function of local wisdom is still alive and then living in Indonesian realities. That's Indonesian Islam, which is totally different with Islam in the Middle East in terms of culture, etc. In terms of ritual teaching, most probably the same, but in terms of approach, etc. And then say dialogue, etc. is very very crucial to mention that Indonesian Islam is different with that of Islam in the Middle East. Thank you.
Pak Ridwan, Nasir, WK. Well, we have so many questions. Okay, I would like to accommodate all questions. Because of that, you should ask direct question, not comment. It's very short, yeah? Not comments, but question. Pak Ridwan first, Nasir, Ibu WK, and then Majilo, and then you will not. Okay, 4. Please, thank.
Okay, thank you, Pak Syafiq. First of all, I would like to appreciate the publication of the book. I think it's very important, and maybe it can be one of the material readings for Islam Wasatiyah that Pak Sapi teach every year. Considering the time limitation, I have just only one small questions. We realize that the thinkings of Gus Dur and Cak Nur especially, they have some resistance from the, let's say, the Muslim conservative. My question is thinking about the socio-political context. how far the relevance of the three of great thinkers, and then the resistance. Yeah? Do you think the resistance still the same? Maybe Pak Sapi, yeah, Pak Sapi. Do you think the resistance to mindset and thinking of Cak Nur and Gus Dur still the same with the emergence when they were alive, rather now, or and do you think is there any relevance for the current situation, the challenge? Yeah, I think this is from me, Pak Sapik. Yeah, thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Okay, our distinguished professors, thank you for the such an enlightenment session. Actually, my question is, it cannot be, directly. I have to make some comments in order to clarify it. So when our distinguished rector mentioned something about Indonesian Islam being an inspiration to the global world, that is fascinating because, every reasonable person will understand the uniqueness of Indonesian Islam. But if we look back at time, what is the reason behind Indonesian Islam being unique? It's because it's simple, according to my own understanding. It is because, like Professor Philip mentioned, Indonesia, so many versions of Islam came, so many people came, but the founding fathers of Indonesia, they understood those strategies and they come up with Indonesian Islam, which is very contextualization in nature. So now when you said that Indonesian Islam, you want it to be inspiration to the global world, I can think of two things, which is, the first one is, does that implies that you are trying to portray the idea of the, turning back to the imaginary idea of the global Islamic world? That's one. And then the second thing is, if I agree personally that it is because of its cultural uniqueness that it promotes inclusivity and pluralism. So me, for instance, coming from far West Africa, my culture is different. The way I received Islam is different. So what made you think that Indonesian Islam will still serve as an inspiration for someone coming from far West Africa, having different culture, different route in which he accept Islam? I don't know whether my questions are clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Safik, and I really appreciate your forum discussion here. But we have responsibility to spread the idea of the three great thinkers, Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, Gus Dur, Cak Nur, to young generation, to Z generation, and then we should, or we must approach them to know the ideas of the great thinkers. Perhaps we cannot only in the campus, but perhaps go to the park, go to the malls, and spread the ideas. This is a very I think this is a great books from Prof. Komar and et al. And then I think we have responsibility to spread the ideas, the thing of our great thinkers, Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif, Gus Dur, and Cak Nur Kholis. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Machilo. Considering that you are writing thesis on Indonesia, your question must be very critical and sharp.
I hope so. Good afternoon to the speakers. I am actually studying right now what happened in Indonesia in 1965, and actually I am also curious with the Gus Durian philosophy, especially that my friend Libas is always bringing me in the Wahid Institute. So Um, Concerning what happened in 1965, actually, I read somewhere that in one of Gus Dur's interview, since I'm really intrigued with his philosophy, he said that the ban on communism and PKI must be lifted. I believe, if I read that right, and at the same time, Muslim organizations, including conservative forces in Indonesian society, should rectify on what happened in 1965, especially that they are the major political actors involved in the killings. So I just want to know the context why Gus Dur have said that, especially that he is the president of the state, knowing that he is a prominent Muslim scholar and also at the president of the republic.
Okay. Pak Shafi would like to start.
Just short answer related to Pak Ridwan's question. To certain level, I would like to emphasize here is that in my perspective, in my opinion, and my belief is that the idea of those three intellectual remain exist and even spreading to all Indonesian people, especially the young generation. As far as I know, this is a great legacies of those three noted Muslim intellectual, Kak Nur, Gus Dur, and Buya Shafi'i Ma'arif. The problem lies in the fact, you are right, the challenge, especially after the collapse of Suharto, we saw the reality, the rise of liberal, the rise of conservative and radical Islam in Indonesia, mostly because of the influence of the transnational Islam, especially in the Middle East. The idea of Ikhwanul Muslimin and then any others radical conservative group exists and then spreading. The problem lies in the fact is that to certain level they develop the idea of Islam in which very very committed to strict legal and exclusive mindset. So their demand is to implement Sharia, strict legal Sharia. In this regard, I would suggest that I am not opposing Sharia itself, but what kind of Sharia we are going to implement. If say strict, legal, and exclusive Sharia, I will totally disagree. But if democratic, inclusive Sharia, most welcome. So in this regard, it's quite clear that in Indonesia, current situation is that to certain level, learning from the situation, especially during the Governor Ahok, the issue, the rise of identity politics because of the support of radical and conservative Islam. That's the greatest challenge, related to the inclusive Islam, because we are facing the idea that implementation of strict legal Sharia to certain level, as long as they're committed to the strict legal exclusive only, not say follow it by radical and then say even say violent action will be okay. However, in reality, to certain level, certain groups such as I mentioned here is that Islamic Defender Front, FPI, etc., justify the use of violence. That we have to reject at all. This is our challenge. In the future, we have to maintain that the idea of inclusive Muslim must be implemented. No other alternative, because Indonesia is, say, a country in which committed to, in my opinion, is that more committed to Islamic inclusivism rather than Islamic radicalism. We oppose Islamic radicalism in this regard. Thank you.
Okay. I'll only probably respond to Majello. This is his revenge. He just defended his thesis 2 days ago. I was asking questions, now he's asking me questions. So Majello just passed the thesis exam, so now he's officially graduate alumni of our university. Our seventh graduate, and he wrote a thesis comparing, and this is very interesting, comparing for Indonesians probably this is controversial issue comparing the life of Indonesian Communist Party and the Philippines Communist Party. And then that's I could see the context of his question about 1965 and how Gus Dur reflected on the event of 1965 after that turmoil period when after the failed coup, and this is also a controversial term, failed coup, right, Majelo, whether it's a coup or whatever happening between the Indonesian Communist Party and the army. But Gus Dur, then when he became president, he was making statement, right, that we should somehow rectify our stance on what happened in 1965. And I think it is consistent with his lifelong belief, right? Because what happened in 1965, sad killings happened, in the numbers that was so big numbers of people were killed and so on. And Gus Dur, I think he was not defending, in the sense, he's not defending the Indonesian Communist Party, but he was defending his belief that no one should be discriminated against or no one should be executed because of their belief or religion or color of the skin or gender. So I think that is very consistent with his personality and with his interpretation of, again, if we are coming back about how Islam in Indonesia reflected by these three thinkers, is that no one should be executed because of their different interpretation and different belief. And that's, I think, what when Pak Rektor mentioned about the inspiration of Indonesian Islam is actually what we are trying to have here is that conflicts, right, because of religion or ethnic and others, can be solved through peaceful means. If we have the belief that no one should be executed because of their different interpretation. And that's, I think, we are rather a little bit more luckier in Indonesia compared to different region where execution happens because of different interpretations of religion, of thinking and so on. So that's, I think, very relevant and consistent with his thinking. And I think idiosyncratic factor play a very important role. I read somewhere interview with Gus Dur, or maybe somebody else narrated why Gus Dur had such a very strong belief. Gus Dur was studying not in the West. Unlike Cak Nur in University of Chicago and Buya Safi Marif, for a short period of time he studied at my university. He was doing his, I think, MA or PhD. He did not finish at NIU. He returned because his son passed away and so on, got various problems at home, so he could not finish the study at Northern Illinois University. But then he was very lucky to get another opportunity even to study at a better university, that is University of Chicago. But Gus Dur studied in Baghdad, right? If I'm not in Iraq. In Iraq, right? And I think I read the interview now. I forgot. Maybe Pak Shafiq can verify this. Gus Dur, every day he passed a field where he frequently saw political opponents of the regime at that time was executed because of their different belief of the regime. It affected him as a young man that then he made a promise to himself that whenever he had the opportunity, when he became leader, he would protect different opinion. And that, I think, the essence, even in the Islamic thinking, right? You cannot impose religion to other people and interpretation. So I think, Majelo, back to your question, it is very consistent with his lifelong belief that you should not be executed because of your thinking and belief.
Pak Rektor, maybe you will pick up the question from Nasir, whether the Indonesian Islam as inspiration of the world, it is also not only to the Western to, let's say, the rest of the world. What we call South.
Well, I raise one question first is, why there are so many school of thought in Islam? It could be in fiqh, theology, philosophy, tasawwuf. There are many school of thought, madhahib. Because Quran is open text to interpret. Quran is one, Muhammad is one, but there are many interpretation. Those ulama interpret Islam from their own perspective. And it is very much influenced by the academic training. That is why there are many interpretations of Islam, even though Quran is one, Muhammad is one. Since Quran is open text to interpret and it still exists going on until today, that is why there are many type of madhahib in Islam. In Imam Shafi'i, there is Qaul Qadim, Qaul Jadid, the old thought and the new thought. Suppose Imam Shafi'i has long life until now, still alive, I'm sure there will be the third thought or fourth thought because of the development of society and science. Since his life only maybe 70 years old, so they can only introduce Qaul Jadid and Qaul Qadim. If we suppose live to 100,000 years, there will be the Qaul Ajdad, the newest thought, because of the dynamic of the social change. And it is, I think, very much accepted and understood by Indonesian Muslim as it is explained by Prof. Philip, because in Indonesia, well, just imagine, Indonesia is far away from Saudi Arabia. Even it is, well, interfered by India, but why Indonesia became the largest Muslim country in the world, even though it is far away from Saudi Arabia? It is a long discussion about that. But one among them, the reason is because Islam brought here by the trader, and trader has characteristic that is inclusive and well, like to create new friendship, and they want to have more friendship for the sake of their trading. Therefore, Islam come to Indonesia not by the sword, but by trading, by negotiation, by friendship. And those trader and ulama come to Indonesia almost have tasawwuf the background. Not theologian, not jurisprudence, but it is tasawwuf. You know that in the tasawwuf tradition, the people more inclusive than others, more tolerant. So in Indonesia, that it is the center of Hinduism and Buddhism. It is marked by the Borobudur temples, Prandaman temples. You can imagine that there were that Buddhists and Hindus spread all over Indonesia, but replaced by Islam. It is interesting to scrutinize why it happened, but it takes time to discuss about that. And second one is this, what the question? I think it's enough. Oh, well, no, it is not the best model for other world, but Indonesia can contribute something. That what we understand, we practice in Indonesia based on situation. That's why this triple IU would explain what and why and how. Of course, that every nation, every country has own characteristic, but Indonesia has also typical Islam in Indonesia that we can share, we can contribute to others. And I'm sure that those thinkers can contribute and inspiring others. Why? Because we already come to the high stage, we are living the thinker, introduce post-ideologies, post-nationalism, and Islam which is compatible with the globalism, pluralism, the idea of progress, of humanity, and so on. Those are rooted in Islamic teaching. Before, Islam was monopolized by certain group. So, whenever you are Muslim, you should follow you should affiliate with political party, Islamic political party. But you know, the Islam much larger and higher than political party. And those three thinkers liberate Islam from those categories, from those hegemony of political party. So we in Indonesia, to be Muslim, it's more relaxed, more inclusive, but try to have a deeper understanding about Islam. So whenever you observe Indonesia, you will find many Muslim, they could be affiliated with many different political parties in Indonesia. It's not happened before. But after these three thinkers, that's going well. We enjoy being Muslim, and we secure being Muslim, and we get relaxed being Muslim without being threat by others. That I think one of the contribution of those three thinkers. Okay.
The last but not least, question from Mbak Weka.
Okay, thank you for the question, Mbak Weka. How to spread? I think we have a younger generation who can spread the new, what's that? The Islamic, the inclusive and substantive Islam by using TikTok or the social media. I think they are better off rather than us. We only can talking in front of the audience, but I think printed material is long lasting, yeah. Like this also, I support the idea of having it in English, so this really can be inspiration for the world by using printed media. And you know better actually the answer for your question. And I would like to close my statement by answering actually about the opposition, where the opposition to the idea of these three thinkers when they were alive and now is still happening. Well, I think Muslims are not monolithic, even though Islam is monolithic, because of the ways that we interpret the Quran is different. So I think Islamists cannot agree with the substantialists, and therefore we need to agree to disagree. Yeah. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
I think this is very rich and hot discussion today, and I do not want to summarize the content of the discussion, and I would like to thanks to the speakers here, to the editors, and also for all of you for attending this discussion. I think this is the second series of our discussion in the library, and we would like to see you again in the next discussion. And then we provide food here in the first floor. Please feel free to take it. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.